I'm Anthony Dunkerley, a former UK detective, now international advisor investigating human trafficking and people smuggling. I've spent years travelling the world, from conflict zones to corporate boardrooms, meeting the people on the front line of modern slavery. But now, the story comes home. I'm coming back to the UK. Because modern slavery isn't just happening out there, it's happening here, in our communities, our workplaces, and our everyday lives. Away from the headlines and policy debates, these are the moments that matter most. Real people, real work, real conversations. And the moments that keep them human. The small victories, the shared humour, and the strength to show up again tomorrow. This is the Let's Talk Modern Slavery podcast with me, Anthony Dunkerley. Subscribe now and be a part of the conversation. Coming up in this week's episode of Let's Talk Modern Slavery. The global tariffs, and Trump, and what impact is it going to have over time, do you think?
It's already having a very negative impact. This is bringing us back to the end of the 19th century, taking us away from wanting to have better and more inclusive society.
And we're getting them out one by one.
DEI has been forbidden. Anything to do with diversity, inclusion, equity are enemy words. Just the idea of deciding what words you can use and what words you cannot use, to me, reminds me of the purge in the 30s in the Soviet Union.
Elise, thank you so much for letting me come to see you today. Elise Groulx, here at the 9 Bedford Road Chambers in London. Elise, I've wanted to interview you for so long now. We keep chatting on the phone, but you're flying here, there and everywhere, and it's so difficult to pin you down. But understandably, because of the amazing work that you do. Criminal defence lawyer, attorney, advocate, clearly an international expert on human rights and business. The list goes on and on and on. Is there anything that you don't do, Elise? Is there?
Something. When I see what's happening in the world right now, I wonder if everything I tried to do has led to anything good.
Yeah.
You say, wow, I've given my life to that, and here we are, and the bottom of a pit.
And we need to speak about this, don't we? Yeah, it's very timely.
Very discouraging.
There's so many places.
But you don't have the right to be discouraged when you're a human rights person, so you have to strap your boots on every morning and say, here we go again.
Well, you're still so motivated, which sort of probably brings us to the beginning, really, of how did you how were you motivated to get into this kind of work from the start? What was your journey into this world of human rights and business?
Well, my journey was criminal law. I was a public defender for many years, and I started discovering the world of the underdogs, the world of the people with no voice, with not even the capability to express their case. We had to spend hours trying to prepare the case so that they could tell a story, so that they could defend themselves, and they just couldn't. I'd spend hours with them, and then we get to court and they froze and they couldn't talk anymore because I knew the story by heart. I was able to express the story, but it kind of broke my heart because I said the first thing people have to do is they have to be able to talk, to express their story so they can make a point, defend themselves, fight for their own rights. And that was missing. So it's like a discovery, because when you have a minimum of education, you usually are able to express yourself.
Yeah.
And these people were not able to express themselves.
And where did that journey start for you?
It started in Quebec.
It was Quebec?
Yeah. I was educated in France and in Quebec in the very French system. But my law degree I got from Quebec. So in the Canadian system, which is a hybrid system between France and the UK.
Yeah.
And in criminal law, as a barrister in criminal law in Quebec, it's like if I was a barrister here. It's identical. It's the same system, same jurisprudence, same skills, same life. You're on your own, you're solo, even if you're part of a public defender's office. I saw different shows about barristers here, and I thought this is exactly what I do all day long.
Yeah. Because it's similar to UK systems and other places in Europe, did that allow for the transfer of you to come over to work in the UK? I know we're probably leaping forward but it's...
I would say, until I went to law school, I considered myself totally of the French world. I didn't speak English. My dad was a French actor, so I was totally educated in the French culture. And when I studied law, even though there was part of my law degree that's French law, most of it is UK, because you know what happened in Canada, there was a conquest. And they negotiated civil laws, fine, we can leave them to civil law, but the rest will be British law. And so I kind of discovered the British system, which I think is a fabulous system. I love the parliamentarian system. I think it's probably the best system of government. So I started feeling divided between who I was as a lawyer, being totally loyal to that system, and who I was as a human being, being very French and very Latin. So this, at times, had been hard to reconcile.
Yeah. So you've been in Quebec originally. You've got this love of the law. You were working with the underdogs, those without the voice. Sometimes that's difficult for people to think, because we always think of good guy, bad guy, or that
It's
kind of, good
like
woman,
that.
bad woman kind of thing in the justice system. Because someone is accused of something, they must have done it. They must have been part of it. But the reality is very different, and you've had first-hand experience of that and working with those people.
Like, shoplifters, like women who didn't have money to feed their kids, they would go steal food. That's the kind of client I had at first. Of course, drug offenders, but the drug was to forget the life that they had. Battered wives, gender people, a lot of prostitution, a lot of trans, impaired driving, assault. Basically, that's the crunch of criminal law on a daily basis. And then, of course, I did some murder cases. And I did a long violent police case that lasted for almost 2 years. Wow. Where I represented the police.
Yeah.
So I discovered the other side of the coin, because usually I was against the police, but there I had the police as a client. And I really enjoyed discovering that, and that was very helpful for my future past that we can talk about later on. So I basically have represented in white-collar crime and a lot of first offenders. And that's probably what made me. I think I mentioned my dad was an actor. And people ask me all the time, why didn't you want to be an actress? And I said, because I want to do something meaningful and serious. In a way, because I love theater, but I thought it's not serious. I want to do something much more serious. And I wanted to work on the role of women in these space, which was still pretty limited at the time. And when I told my dad I wanted to be a lawyer, he was horrified, because for him that represented bourgeoisie. It represented very conservative values, and he was so far from that. And I said, I don't want to be that kind of lawyer, Dad. I want to be a lawyer that's going to help people, that's going to be working, from the ground up. And it took him a long time to finally accept it. But one day I was going to a jury trial, and I was climbing the stairs, and I said, in the end, you did choose theater, because this is theater.
Yeah.
You're playing a role.
Yeah, and for those who have been in a courtroom and seen the defense, particularly in the American system
you
as well,
take it very seriously, but you have your gown, and you have to really play a role to convince.
Yeah.
And theater, you have to persuade that it's real. There, you have to convince people that what you're saying has value, and they have to listen to you.
Yeah. Sometimes when I've been in the States and I've seen the sort of the criminal lawyers, the big criminal lawyers, particularly in certain states, will have big billboards, whether they're in Texas and otherwise, you'll obviously see them with the cowboy hats on, call this number for, it's a very sort of celebritized sort of position there. But it is, you have to be able to be in front of people, to be in front of a jury, convince and tell the story of your client.
Yeah, tell the story, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a storytelling job with humanity.
Yeah. You mentioned about, because I'm trying to find the link there with the business, and you touched on white collar. So
That's
was it
not
the
what led
that
me,
wasn't
no.
the route?
No, no.
So what was the route?
So I had studied here at LSE. I did an LLM. That's where I learned English, because before that I didn't know English. I met my husband, who's American, who was studying at Oxford at the time, hence the link to the US.
Right.
And I just got so passionate about international criminal law. I got involved in the creation of the International Criminal Court. When I was out of my LLM here at LSE, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do law and politics? And international criminal law is law and politics. So that was kind of my dream. And when that court was being created, I said, I have to get involved.
Wow.
So I tried to get a case. I was one of the first lawyers to put herself on the list for the ICTY, the Tribunal for Yugoslavia. But because I was totally not known, nothing came to me. So I said, well, I'm going to go to the beast. And I created a first NGO, which was called the International Criminal Defense Attorneys Association. Yep. Stephen Kay, who's the head of the chambers here, was very involved. We got to meet each other. That's back in 96. That's a while ago. And my purpose was to make sure that the defense was properly represented in these international courts, because the accused were such the villains that nobody wanted to have strong defense rights. And I thought, if we don't have a strong defense, we're going to create kangaroo courts, because it's going to be so easy to always convict whom we think is the bad guy. But in his country, in the middle of a revolution, he might not be the bad guy. Yeah. And furthermore, this is going to become the model justice for the whole world at a time where we thought multilateralism was a possibility. And so we thought, I thought I need to be that voice. This is my passion. And so I created that NGO, and I started participating in all the negotiations to build the International Criminal Court.
Wow.
And I went to the UN. Sometimes I would take my 3 kids. I mean, I would live in one room. I would have interns helping me with the kids. But that was kind of an adventure. I took them everywhere. I took them to Mexico, to The Hague, to France, to the UK, to other countries. I mean, that was like a real voyage. So that's what took me back to one of my passions, which was anything to do with international affairs and politics. And then that first organization led me to creating a second organization called the International Criminal Bar for the International Criminal Court. And then I worked with 400 bars around the world, including the Bar of England and Wales and the Paris Bar. And we created that organization the day the war in Iraq started.
Wow.
In Berlin. We were in Berlin. There were 1 million young people walking the streets against that war in Berlin. And I was elected the first president. And so that kind of gave me a platform. And this work was so taking, it was so intense that in the end, I had my kids. I didn't do a case, but the policy work I did, I thought maybe had more impact than if I had done a case. I couldn't do all of it. I kept my practice back in Montreal at the time and was going back and forth between Montreal and New York and Europe. But after the court was created in 2003, I thought, what is going to be the next step? What's going to happen in this world where NGOs have been so powerful in creating the court? There were more than 2,000 NGOs involved in the creation of the court. When the treaty was signed in July 1998, we were 2,000 people at the FAO in Rome, and we erupted into a standing ovation for 2.5 hours, where you had states and NGOs embracing each other. That was very, very special. And it enabled me to discover the world of the NGOs, discovered the world of public diplomacy, because you learn a different type of negotiations than what you do in court. Sure. I'll tell you an anecdote. I mean, I was very confrontational at the beginning about my ideas. And a Dutch diplomat who then became a friend told me, young lady, you're going to fail if you keep that attitude. It's not going to work. You're not in a court here. You're in a diplomacy setting where people hate confrontation. Yeah. You have to learn to maneuver around what you want. And you basically have to learn a whole new set of skills, which was, I mean, absolutely true. Very good advice. Very hard for someone who's an advocate like myself who always wants to, rise up to defend something. You have to learn something else. But it was very, very useful. So I learned to work with NGOs. And I thought, what is the end purpose of the ICC? It's to put an end to impunity. There was a big debate about including corporations as possible subject of law in the Rome Treaty. And in the end, France was pushing very strongly for that. And Germany didn't have that in its own national law. So they didn't want to have a treaty that would have, two-speed vehicle. So in the end, they gave up on that with the hope that national prosecutors would take it on. Now Germany has changed its law, it has it, but the Rome Statute is only for individuals. Yeah. So I thought what's going to happen is the NGOs who have become very empowered by the creation of the court are going to go after corporations for liability. They're going to be... that was 2003. They won't go after states because it's so hard for an individual to go after a state. It's changing. But in 2003, I thought there's going to be a movement for corporate accountability, especially in conflict-affected areas, because we know that corporations have fueled conflict, willfully or not. Yeah. I mean, in a very rich area like the Congo, you can see that the mining company are fueling the conflict. Yeah. So I started really taking my platform as an international criminal law person to give talks, to write, to teach. I did a lot of teaching to judges and prosecutors at the time, but also to try to explore that area of corporate accountability in conflict-affected areas. So I worked on that for about 10 years, a lot in the mining sector. And I ended up organizing a huge event in Paris with the help of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in March 2013, where we invited corporations, NGOs, and lawyers and journalists. We were 300 to discuss this issue of corporate accountability. Yeah. The chief prosecutor of the ICC was there, the ambassador at large from the US to war crimes was there. So this was like an important event to try to say, what is that issue of corporate accountability? I was hired by a big corporation as a consultant in 2008 for 2 years to map international criminal law, to show where are the areas where they could be held liable. They were hoping that I was going to say, don't worry, everything is going to be just fine. And I said, no. I identified 25 modes of participation into crimes. Yeah. So that's a very vast net. Yeah. I'm sorry that it's not been used to that purpose. My vision at the time was that the court would have a prosecutor, a set of prosecutors, and it would work hand in hand with national prosecutors, and they would exchange cases. Yeah. And the prosecutor of the ICC would take the cases that were the most important in terms of visibility and impact, but other cases that are not as important for political reasons are very important for legal reasons and should have been systematically distributed to prosecutors from around the world, from all the countries that had ratified the Rome Statute. Yeah. It's not happened systematically, unfortunately. I mean, there's so much politics there. I mean, that could be the topic of another meeting, but yeah. My purpose, and you can cut that, but my purpose was to bring the bars, because I knew the bar were reinforcing the legal profession, the bar associations, and that the court was so political, it would need that support. But the people at the court at the time didn't want to have an independent legal profession. They didn't want to have a stand on its own legal profession. They wanted to kind of keep some control. They were very worried about this counter power that the legal
So you're getting a lot of resistance to this.
Enormous. And today I say, I'm very sorry, but they were so wrong. If they had the bars like I was trying to do with all the groups that we had brought together, they would be a lot stronger politically. They wouldn't be pushed around the way they're being pushed around today, because they kind of stand on its own. There is no world government. There is no police force internationally. I mean, you have, Netanyahu who's under a warrant, and then you have some administration that are saying, we're not going to respect that warrant. I mean, this is so counterproductive to create a real international institution. It makes the life of the prosecutor very hard. But it's not him that I blame. It's the people at the beginning that were refusing to let us have a very strong legal profession that would be independent. That was my vision at the time anyway.
Over the time, have you seen changes for the better where corporations, if we focus purely on that at the moment, there's so much to dissect from what you said. I mean, we could literally go on for days. I mean, I thought you were cool before today, and the stuff you're telling me, it's just shot through the roof, Elise. But
you thought I was what you say, cool?
Cool, yeah. When we're looking at corporations in particular and the governance that is placed over those corporations, you mentioned about the DRC and mining, and when their activities are exasperating or directly contributing to the negative consequences for people's lives, for the people that live there.
They're bringing money into a conflict.
How? So it's fueling it, isn't it? So
absolutely.
Over time, and I appreciate that resistance was maybe more palpable back then, but are you seeing things changing? Because corporations, are they listening? And if they are, why are they listening now? Is it the stick with the law? Is it NGOs' pressure? What is it?
So I'll switch to one fact before. So right after the court, Ruggie was appointed in 2005 by Kofi Annan, and there started to be meetings at the UN around the creation of the UNGPs. And I got involved in that indirectly. I was not like at the forefront, but I got involved, and I started finding that very interesting. And I decided in 2010 to call myself a human rights lawyer rather than just a criminal lawyer, because dealing with issues of labor, forced labor, slave labor, very poor conditions, working conditions, I thought this is the border between criminal law and labor law. And this is what a human rights person is, that it encompasses everything to do with rights.
Yeah.
And so I moved in that direction, and so I saw the progress that have been happening in the last 15 years. You had Rana Plaza in 2013, and then you had the French government taking the lead, deciding to adopt a law, which was adopted in March 2017, the first law of its kind.
Is this the voie de vigilance?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that law kind of changed the way people had to think about these issues in France. There was a lot of resistance until it was adopted, but when it was adopted, the corporation started to be willing to embark into this voyage, because it is a voyage. Yeah. And the law is very open-minded in terms of how you can do it. The Député Potier, who was pushing for that law, said, to me, it's like granting a driving license to a corporation. Globalization is a highway. You have to have a driving license to drive on a highway.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. And I don't need to tell you, once you have your driving license, you can do it the way you think is best for your sector, your region, your corporation. but I want you to abide by large principles. And the difference between common law and civil law, which to me is very important in that respect, is civil law has this idea of public interest and greater good embedded into codes. Common law, which is common to Canada, the US, Australia, and the UK being the starting point, is more sector by sector. So here you don't have a devoir de vigilance at large, you have the law on modern slavery. So they decided to attack this issue. That was 2015. But it was a reporting law, which is not the same thing as the duty of care law. But the idea was not like a kind of umbrella for the greater good of the whole society. It's not the way it's framed. It's framed more in silos, which has advantages and disadvantages. But I do like this Jacobin idea of public interest.
Yeah.
It does change the way laws are drafted and implemented, because you have an end purpose, which is it's supposed to be good for everyone.
Yeah.
You don't hear that in the Anglo-American world. This is not something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Of course, there are preoccupations about the greater good, but it's not formulated the same way. So, yes, I saw a difference in France from the time that law was adopted. I was giving a talk in New York 2 years ago, and there was a lawyer, a very corporate lawyer, who was saying, we're all human rights lawyer now, which I thought, well, good to know. And he was saying, we can tell our clients what to do and they will follow. And I said, well, I'm very sorry, that's not so. It's changed after the law was adopted. Now they know they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So they're willing to embark into this work and this due diligence requirements. So once that French law was adopted, it started happening in many other jurisdictions, like in Norway. In the Netherlands, they had a law against child labor, but it's not been implemented yet because they're waiting for the CSDDD from Europe, which
European,
is the European sustainability law and due diligence.
Yeah.
And Germany adopted a law on supply chain similar to the French law in the sense that it had the same kind of spirit or objectives, but it was very detailed, just the opposite of the French law. It was a very organized framework, like the Germans like rules and what do you do with the rules. And anyway, that was adopted in 2022, so it's recent, and it was implemented, I think, as 2023. But when the government made a compromise with the left and the center and the right on April 9th in Parliament, and the first gesture was to repeal the German supply chain law with immediate effect, saying we're going to wait for CSDDD to do something. So, and that's where you see how politics is so important in that work. It's fundamental. Anything we do now, before you could have said it's economics, but now I think policy and politics supersedes the economy.
Yeah. I mean, with the CSDDD as well, and there's talks of it, well, more than talks now of it being diluted from what it was originally going to be. You talk about civil and criminal law. Within criminal law, you have someone who is found, let's say, if they're found guilty, a punishment may be which serving a prison sentence. It might be, but mostly that's the kind of recompense that would occur. When you've got civil law on corporations and business, I'm not aware, but it's certainly very rare, maybe back in the financial crash, of those that sit at the top of a company, the directors, CEOs and others, facing punitive action against them directly for what has happened in their company or supply chain. So are we moving towards something, do you think, on this trajectory of where those that sit at the top of corporations may find themselves facing criminal charges because they ought to have known, using civil terms,
Yeah,
ought to have known
no, that's criminal
of
law
what
too.
was in criminal law, of what was going on. Are we moving that way, or is that just a pipe dream for myself, yourself, and
Well, we
the
all
others
have that pipe dream.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes something happens. I would tell you, yes, I think there's hope. We might be moving in that direction. Then you have a very strong backward political movement, and it's erased. What happened with these laws is the OECD in the footpath of the UNGPs kind of tried to create a standard of behavior for corporations. And that's what due diligence was. It was a standard of behavior. And that, of course, applies to the individuals that are managing the corporations, but it should also apply to the corporation. To my knowledge, the only body of international law that recognized the responsibility of corporation is the African Charter of People and Rights. That one has specific language about corporate liability because of all the mining companies operating in Africa.
Yeah.
There's not been a case, to my knowledge, yet. There were cases in Nuremberg, but they all were individual liability. They were not, it's not the corporate entity that was convicted. It was the individual in the name of a company as the representative of a company, but it was not the company.
Yeah.
And so one factor will be the mobilization of civil society, because I saw what they could do. The court would not have been created without civil society. And right now, we're facing a huge climate crisis. And again, I think that civil society is going to be the actor that's going to move at the forefront. And I think we're going to have to be much more severe about consequences of pollution. So you have a body of cases that's emerging that's very interesting, where finally there's a recognition of the responsibility of a state to do something. There were cases in Switzerland, there were cases in France, cases in the Netherlands that are kind of mapping the UNGP, following the UNGP, the United Nations Guiding Principles. And in the Netherlands, the Supreme Court said, once we have endorsed the UNGP, it becomes basically, they didn't say the law, but there's social consensus in the Netherlands that we've got to apply them. So they went kind of very far from strict law abiding norms. They went into recognizing the value of soft law, of norms as applying to a country. And they ordered Shell to reduce its gas emission by 50% by 2030. And Shell decided to close its operations in the Netherlands. They moved to the UK, and then they were being expected by a large movement of NGOs who started suing them. It's kind of a mess because it's happening, country by country, and there's no uniformity. And with the CSDDD, we thought we were getting to some kind of uniformity. And now business is pushing for the undoing of that law, that directive. That directive was adopted in July 2024, so it was voted in. In the meantime, there were elections in the parliament, and the European Parliament has moved far to the right. So that's the opportunity they took to say, well, let's water it down. There's the CSRD. CSRD is the reporting directive. On the same topics, but it's about reporting. This directive has 12 or 1,300 criteria to decide what you have to report on. And some people say it's too much. It's too much. We can't deal with all that. So there's some criticism that might be reasonable. But at the same time, I was very opposed to that omnibus bill because I thought, we'll deal with that in practice. Let's not undo something that took years to build. But that's where we are. We are at that crossroad where nobody knows if it's going to be. It's been adopted by the Commission, but Europe is a three-party thing. You have the Commission, you have the Parliament, and then you have the union. So there are three different bodies that decide. To undo something that was done, they need 2/3. So that's a lot. They can't do it at 50 plus 1 like last year. They have to have 2/3 of Parliament deciding we're going to undo that, unless they reach a consensus. That's where we are. I don't believe we'll know anything until the fall. So all the countries that were about to adopt laws to transpose that directive into their national law in the whole of the European space with extraterritorial jurisdiction for corporations who, foreign corporations who operate in Europe, which is a huge market, 650 million consumers. Everybody is up in the air about that now. So until something is decided, we don't know.
Human rights violations don't just live in headlines.
9 men were trafficked from the Czech Republic and forced to work at a UK McDonald's restaurant by a criminal gang.
They live in your supply chain. If your business isn't ready to detect them, you're exposing yourself reputationally, financially, and even legally. The Risk Ready series helps you get ahead of that. I'm Tony Dunkley, a former UK detective and international advisor on investigating human trafficking. I've worked around the world, from Africa to the Middle East, and I want to help you and your business become risk ready. The Risk Ready series is a 6-part live online training experience. It's packed with real-world cases, editable e-workbooks, and tools you can use straight away. If you work in procurement, HR, ESG, legal, or compliance, this training gives you the tools and confidence to act. Legislation is tightening. Supply chain scrutiny is rising. The question is not if, it's when. And when it comes, will you be ready? Join me live for the Risk Ready series on investigating human rights violations in supply chains. Sign up now. Take your team from vulnerable to risk ready.
I think there's been some progress. Like, for example, in France, the Court of Appeal has created a special court to deal with these matters with judges that are very well trained. And these issues of civil liability that you were referencing to are not well defined in every jurisdiction. Apparently, that kind of civil liability doesn't exist in Germany. The CSR, the Triple D, was creating a regime of civil liability. And there is a pushback at the same time as there's been some progress. Let's agree that there's been some progress. There's certainly been a lot of awareness building. I think training is necessary. I think we should be training kids in school, in high school, to go talk. That's where it starts. To have good citizenship, you need to start talking to them, I would say, from kindergarten on. To explain to them the principles of living together, of responsibility towards each other, of bringing each other up together, acting collectively. I'm not against individual rights. I'm all in favor of individual rights, but they have to interplay with collective space. Like, for example, in the US, you have the concept of zealous representation, where lawyers, much more than in the UK, are very, very aggressive in representing their clients. And you can understand it because the judges are much more interventionist than British judges. And the prosecutors, too, are much more aggressive. So it's a whole system. At the same time as, to me, the fact that a corporation would be entitled to the same kind of zealous defense as an individual makes no sense. No. Because when these safeguards for the defense were built here in the UK in the 18th century, it's because you risk the death penalty for stealing a piece of bread. So that's why they had to build all these safeguards. A corporation doesn't risk anything but losing money and having stain on its reputation. So when you see these slap suits, for example, preventing NGOs from going after a corporation saying we're going to make them shut up. Again, you have the power of money to make people shut up. And I think this is the cancer of our societies, having that much money on one side, a very small percentage of that side, against a huge mass of people. And money in politics in the U.S. is a big, big problem. In particular in the U.S., and unfortunately, it's been starting to happen in other jurisdictions, like here in the U.K. and France. I don't know so much about Germany, but certainly in Canada, Australia, it's the same kind of system. Money has become bigger in politics. I mean, it shouldn't be there. I mean, politics is for the people to make a decision. You shouldn't be able to buy votes.
Talking about the finance, maybe the bottom line, and that's very, very pertinent and timely at the moment where we're looking at the global tariffs, and Trump and things that have gone on there. What impact are we seeing in the short term? And if you can put your forward thinking hat on what we might see, impact longer term of the tariffs that have been imposed, retracted, and so on. The global, when it comes to economics, certainly the uncertainty of that, particularly around trade, and how that might impact things like the laws that we're seeing retracting, such as CSDDD. What impact is it going to have over time, do you think, the trade issue, Trump, global uncertainty on economics?
Well, on the trade issue, I'm going to right away make a caveat that I'm not an economist, and it's economy to me is a field of study that's so counterintuitive. I read a lot, I devour everything I can find, but there are notions in economy that I don't understand. So from what I read, I can see that it's already having a very negative impact on the economic situation in the U.S. The economy was very strong. The inflation has not gone down, and people are struggling. The number of jobs created, it's still not collapsed, even though they've fired so many people in the civil service. But, I mean, this is bringing us back to the end of the 19th century, when there was no tax, there was no income tax. And I mean, there was a kind of a free-for-all that was before the creation of the world, how do you call it? The World Trade Organization?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
WTO.
Yep.
Yeah, because in French it's not that at all. It's so, and I mean, it's all this current of authoritarianism that's kind of taking us away from wanting to have a better, a more inclusive society. DEI has been forbidden. I mean, anything to do with diversity, inclusion, and equity are enemy words. Just the idea of deciding what words you can use and what words you cannot use, to me, reminds me of the purge in the 30s in the Soviet Union. They had their lexicon of the words you could or could not use. I'm thinking always of Kessler. Kessler was a remarkable man, Arthur Kessler, who wrote extensively about that. He was a communist until that happened. That got him very scared. He says, the minute that they're telling me not to call a cat, I'm worried. Yeah. And the minute that everybody loses their sense of humor about it, I become very worried. Yeah. So as much as I'm scared that we're going back to that period, as much as 100 years of evolution is not forgiven, it's not lost. And when I think of America, I think of a society that's always had an extremely vibrant civil society. And it had democracy at the very local level, boards of decision everywhere in cities and schools and in corporations, in organizations, that I think it's going to be very hard to destroy that. Yeah. Of course, immigration has been an issue, even though I would be very open to immigration myself. I don't have any problem with that, but the problem is making people feel that they're not losing their space, their place, their jobs, even though these are jobs that most people in our societies do not want to do anymore. I mean, I live in Washington, and at 5 p.m. in Washington, you see the hordes of people from Latin America coming in to clean the office. They handle the food, they handle the old people, they handle the babies, they're nurses, they work in hospices. I mean, they're essential to and they do catering and gardening and forestry, and they're amazing workers. I mean, they wouldn't be doing all these jobs if other people wanted to do them, and they do them well. So again, it's a matter of education. I think people need to be educated. And there are movements right now in the US. There is a group of Haitian that was sent to Ohio. They were legally in the US. They were given a temporary permitted status to live in the US because of the situation in Haiti. And the administration decided to go against these people. And the community in Ohio, which is a red state, but the community got to really develop affinities and a liking to these people. They transformed their little city into a very vibrant community again. Mm-hmm. The economy is doing a lot better. So they say, we want to keep these people. They have become our friends. So you see the discrepancy between the leadership, which is not close to the people, and the people who are far from being monsters. I mean, if you tame them to the idea that, yes, you can live side by side with people that are Latinos or Haitians or anywhere from Africa or South America or Asians, you're going to be better off. So we always have these discrepancy, and I think education is the tool to I remember offering my services often to political parties in the US to go speak to kids. I say I want to go in school to go speak to 15 years old about what does it mean to go vote? What is the rule of law? It's a word that means nothing for a kid. But when you explain to them that it's the rule against any arbitrary exercise of power, and you explain every word to them, they understand it. You explain to them, it's to prevent that the strong will basically beat the weak. That you want to make sure that the people who do not have the same power have the same rights. That these rights are implemented in an equal and fair manner. This is the rule of law. Then they get it. And that's where I feel lawyers have such an incredible role to play.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking, if we're trying to educate children, like you quite rightly say,
Well, you bring it to the level of a 5-year-old, but you
How do you teach the adult? Yeah. How do you teach the corporation? Is it the teaching or is it the stick? Is it the law that creates the change because they have to, because they're fearful of what the consequences would be for them or their company if they don't, the shareholder? Or is it civil society? Is it education? Is it responsibility for the larger community? Is that what really impacts companies to change?
Well, to me, these values are what drives the law. Mm-hmm. But of course, the law is also a driver. But when there is a demand from the people to make these things happen, then the law has to adapt.
Yeah, but I think, and I agree, but I think if we're looking at demand, there's an equal, probably conflicting demand from the public to have the cheap shoes, to have the cheap clothing, to have the cheap food off the shelves.
Well, now we're being offered more expensive dolls. Right. So we'll see how that sells.
Sure. So how do we, it seems like everything's pulling away from what you have been done, and others.
Right now it's very, very dark.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, so I was in Poland recently. I was invited in Poland. I'd never been. I was very inspired by my trip in Poland. I gave a talk in a university about business and human rights, explaining what business and human rights was, and then explaining how it's being affected by the current political context. Mm. And I wanted to give hope, because this is dark. So I said, I've been working a lot on access to remedy and on different frameworks and mediation. And these are private initiatives. And we don't need legislation to keep making progress on these fronts. Yeah. And this is what I want to push right now. I want to push on everything that we can still do without having laws. Yeah. And for example, I was hired by the EU 2.5 years ago to build a framework to prevent conflict in mining, oil and gas, and big infrastructure projects. And the essence of that framework that we built, which I presented here 2 days ago in a law firm in London, was to get the stakeholders and the local communities involved from the get-go in the development of the project, not wait for a conflict to start being asked their opinion, but to get them as partner to the business from the beginning and getting people to talk, to build dialogue, to build knowledge together, and to move forward in that direction, and to think about remedy ahead of time instead of top-down when there's a problem, because that never works. And all these issues are based on one concept, which is trust. You need to build trust with people. You're bringing about changes in their community. It might be for the best in some cases, not necessarily. You've got to work with them to make sure that it will be for the best. Without them, you won't succeed. And if you wait for a conflict, it's going to be very hard to make it successful. It's going to fail. Conflict is going to fume and come back all the time if you don't prevent it at the beginning.
And you talk about conflict, persons that are harmed as a result of the corporation or how it works, etc.
So that's not the conflict, that's the result. The conflict is when so many people are harmed, then the population starts rising up and taking to the streets.
So a consequence of all of that.
Blocking the projects. That's happening a lot in South America around mining projects and infrastructure projects where they've been not properly consulted and consulted, and then they take to the streets and they try to block the project. So these corporations invest billions of dollars in these projects and they're paralyzed. And so we went to the World Bank to present our project to the World Bank to try to get a buy-in, to try to get these new ways of approaching problems incorporated as some kind of a standard so that we can move forward and to address these issues of inequality, to address these issues of the working conditions that are so bad, which takes me to another subsidiary subject, which is the bilateral investment treaties that have been negotiated throughout the 70s, where basically a big country asks a small country to come develop project in its space, and they have a bilateral investment treaty, and that's where the negotiations of the labor are being decided. And the small countries are in such dire need of revenues that they will accept these treaties. And then you have arbitration that comes and close it. And arbitration has precedence over decisions of Supreme Courts in these countries. So you have countries in Africa stuck in this process who are trying to do the right thing for the environment, and they're blocked because they risk billions of dollars of sanctions from arbitration. So we're trying to curtail that by saying, why don't we do mediation before arbitration? Because that's going to be a fairer result for everyone. The philosophy of mediation is win-win, not of arbitration.
So mediation at the beginning of the process and then throughout.
The minute there's a problem, mediation is to resolve a conflict. The framework we've designed is to prevent the conflict. But as you get involved at every step of the project, you can mediate conflict when they appear, and they're not huge, they're small at the beginning. And that's where you catch all these issues of bad labor conditions and you try to solve them to make sure that they don't happen, to make sure that slave labor doesn't happen. Lots of companies will tell you, I don't have any slave in my supply chain. Well, I don't think that they're looking to find them. And when you're hired by a company, it's very hard to tell your client, well, I'm going to find something that you don't like, because then you lose the client. So that's why you need to be independent. You have to have, again, independent actors. And you need to convince the contracting parties that it's in their best interest to make sure to know what's happening in their supply chain.
And what are we seeing from the investor side as well? Of those
we're seeing evolution because the organization that invited me 2 days ago is called GALE, Global Alliance for Impact Lawyers. So it is a group of lawyers advising investors on the best way to have positive impact. So a lot of these investors are involved in green project, green energy, the transition, and they want to know how to have impact. And I think they realize they need to be advised by people who have experience from the ground, not just lawyers and, in a shirt and a tie in an office, far remote zone. You need to have a multidisciplinary approach to make sure that these things happen. And again, to educate each other. I'm not a business lawyer, so I need to be educated by business lawyers on what's possible and what's not possible. My role is to push for the maximum for the people, but then they're pushing back. But if it's happening in the form of a dialogue, you can make progress. Again, if you develop trust with your colleagues, like if you develop trust with prosecutors when you're doing a trial, if you ask them something, they will listen to you. If they know you're a liar, they won't listen to you. So it's always the same idea of trust, the same idea of trying to listen to people, understand where they are. And I can give you an example. I did a mediation 2 years ago that lasted 6 months between Myanmar workers and Chinese employers, European brands, and international trade. And the Chinese were asked by the brands to participate in that mediation. And a factory closed on the day of the coup, 1st of February 2021. And the workers were basically let go without anything. I mean, they were like starving. And there I am asked to do a mediation between the workers and the Chinese employers to find a solution in the middle of a coup while everything is not working, for the workers to be able to have something to live on. And the way the Chinese were in that mediation, and I realized it, was they felt so crunched, so caught in a grind between their peers, between the government in China, between their workers, between their colleagues in general, and because between the brands who were putting pressure on them. So they were so angry. After 2 or 3 sessions, they started screaming their head off at me. And I thought to myself, okay, I have a choice here. I can say this is unacceptable. I'm going to put an end to that mediation right now. And I knew if I do that, that's it. There would be nothing for the Burmese workers. And I decided to try to understand the frustration of these people and gradually open the door to the fact that they had in front of them an experienced mediator who was willing to let them fume, rage, express all their frustrations. And that's what developed the trust that made them want to find a solution. But I had to endure that for weeks. It doesn't matter to me because I knew it was not directed at me. But you have to act fast to say, what do I do? Do I take that anger? Do I absorb it and try to see if I can develop some links of trust with these people? And when you think about it, all human relationships are like that. And mediation is really about trying to get people to feel they have a space to talk, and we'll be listening to them neutrally, without judgment, and then get to the heart of their problem, and then try to move on creatively.
You're so right. I mean, like you say, in all relationships in life, it's on an element of trust, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
Work, love, with children, every relationship, with customers, and that's what I love about mediation is to create that trust. And so I believe it's a powerful tool when you know how to use it. Yeah.
You have been involved in this world for a long time. A trailblazer comes to mind with the work that you've done over time, and I really, really mean it. Dealing with the things that you've dealt with over those years, and even still now, as recent as the example you gave there as well, about working with the people. How do you manage your mental health being around that space? And I always ask my guests,
I'm very happy to answer that.
If you are comfortable, how do you manage that?
I feel very fortunate in the sense that I've developed over a lifetime for many experience that I've lived, a lot of resilience. So, and that's not a judgment, because I deal with people who do not have that resilience. And I mean, they can get very affected by events. And I'm not saying I'm not affected by events. I'm a very sensitive person, and yes, I get affected. But somewhere, somehow, my inner flame is always easy to reignite. After the election in the fall, I just didn't know how it was going to be reignited again, and it got reignited. But young people ask me, when do you ever rest? I said, well, this is not what I do. And I don't blame people who need to rest. I guess I'm fortunate or unfortunate to be so passionate in my convictions that it helps, because you want to achieve something. But I've lived with mental illness my whole life in the work I've done. And so I've become very sensitive to the first signs of it, to see how people cope, to try to help them. I find that one of the ways to deal with mental illness is to have a space where you can express yourself. That you can talk either to your family or your friends about the things that really hurt you, and that you need to have some minimum friendly environment around you at least some of the time. Right now, the work I do is pretty lonely, because my family is in the US, I'm working in Europe, so I find that very difficult. But it's not stopping me. Maybe 25 years ago, I would have found it impossible to do that. But I have that sense of urgency that this is the time to keep pushing. This is the time to pass the baton. Do you say the baton?
Yeah.
To make sure that as many young people, men and women alike, want to do that and keep that work going, because this is essential. My 3 kids are not lawyers, but they're 3 incredible human beings. 2 of my kids are doctors. They're specializing in cancer. One of my daughters is a gynecologist. She's specializing in women cancer. My son is a surgeon specializing in the digestive tract and doing research in cancer. And that's a cute anecdote. When he graduated as a doctor, he gave a speech and he said, I don't know if some of you had an opportunity to meet with my mother. She's a pretty passionate advocate. He's got a great sense of humor. And he says, when I'm with a patient, the specter of my mother always appears behind my head. And my mother is telling me, Lawrence, are you being a kind doctor? Are you listening to your patient? Are you being patient? Are you being compassionate? Are you being human? Are you taking the time you need? He was saying that with lots of humor, but I thought this was a fabulous message to a mother.
Yeah.
And people, were telling me, oh, you must be so proud. Your son is a doctor. I said, no, I'm proud because of who he is and how he practices medicine. He could be a jerk and he wouldn't be a good doctor, and I wouldn't be proud of that. I'm very demanding on these values, and I can see that he's incorporated them. So, and my daughter, who's the gynecologist, she's like beyond human. She's super, super human. And my other daughter is more of an activist. She's an environmentalist. She's passionate about plastic. She's involved with Indigenous people. She lives in Detroit. She's very involved in the Black community in Detroit. And she's so committed to what she does. They all work around the clock. So that's not a good example about, preserving.
I wonder where they got that from.
And so in that sense, I miss them like hell. I wish they were all around me all the time, And my son says, Mom, you gave us big wings, so we have to expand our wings. And I say, yeah, I know. And in part because of them, in this world, I don't want to give up. I want to keep working. I'm not thinking about retirement, or this is not in my DNA. This is not something I want to do. But transmission in a kind way. I think kindness is an underestimated value. This is not a value that you develop at 20 because you think being kind is being weak. But as you age, you realize how much you can accomplish with kindness.
Yeah.
And listening to people. I mean, really offering to listen without judgment, because mental illness always brings about judgment, and that's the killer, the absolute killer.
Yeah.
So, do I have hard moments in life? Yes, I do. Do I struggle with mental illness myself? I don't think so, but I mean, I'm kind of a born fighter, which has its good and bad sides. I mean, I can't be like peaceful in an evening and just looking at the sky and listening to the birds. I wish I could, but I've not learned that skill yet. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, I think it does, and I think we were talking briefly, weren't we, before we started? I think we first met before COVID.
Oh yes,
I mean,
we were doing an event at Doughty Street on modern slavery.
That's right, we were, weren't we? And we met briefly, and I can still remember then walking in there, never met you before, and I got you sort of coming up, and I think you just gave me this big hug, and I can still remember this. You probably don't remember,
probably at the end, maybe not at the beginning.
No, I think it was a beginning, and I sort of,
or
like,
you were
there was a hug,
friend.
something like that, yeah. And I thought, wow, this lady, she's very warm and loving. We've not really met before, and this is fantastic. And I can remember you, talking there, and over the year, I followed your career. What I see, online and things like that, and we occasionally message each other. And I consider myself very fortunate to have met you then, and obviously it gives me the opportunity to come and see you now. So when you say, does that answer my question? I think I knew the answer beforehand, having been fortunate to meet you and experience that warmth and passion and motivation
and it's genuine. It's not something I'm not.
Oh, very much.
It's
yeah.
And I think we need to use these characteristics to build. I was having dinner Monday night with two women from Asia, and I said we really need to do more in terms of women leadership, and that kind of leadership. I heard a podcast on Sunday, a U.S. podcast on masculinity and mocking all the feminine values, which was kind of sad because I feel, boys know better than that. You can be a strong man and still respect inclusion and diversity. You're not a weakling because you want to create consensus. And so he was saying, women, they always want consensus, and men, they want action, and they want to act aggressively. One is not incompatible with the other.
Yeah.
Once you have a consensus, then you can drive your truck at full speed. But you need to, driving it alone for yourself is, what does it do?
Yeah.
It shows you have the ability to speed up.
Well, Elise, again, thank you not only for your time today, but for everything you've done already and continue to do so. I know you say you don't rest. I secretly want you to have a little rest, but I don't want you to rest. So on behalf of myself and everyone watching, thank you so much for everything you do, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. Thanks.